Good evening, everybody. This is my favorite night of the week. This was our weekly Sharia Crime Stoppers news analysis program, and I get a chance to listen in with the rest of you and learn things that we don't really hear other places. This is really a news analysis program like no other. So, welcome tonight, Christine Douglas Williams. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back, Dick. How are you keeping?
We're doing okay. We're hanging in there like everybody else who's
Like everybody
watching and
else.
listening. And again, we do have a new group of people that are joining us weekly on YouTube. We've had a real jump in the last 2 or 3 weeks in terms of our Zoom attendees. So if you're new to Zoom, remember Q&A button at the bottom. Type in your question, Mary, where Vicky will be back, and we'll throw a few questions at our news analyst. Christine is going to take us through her observations, and then we'll return for the Q&A. So, Christine, thank you for being with us, and why don't you get us into the news analysis?
Thank you so much, Dick. Now, for those of you watching, I'm going to be taking you on a sort of what I call a roller coaster trip around the world. And most of the news has centered around, of course, the anarchy, given the upcoming US elections, because I believe all of this has to do with exactly that. We need to still note, however, what's going on elsewhere, because there's an onslaught against democracy that's going on from all sides. So here's my preamble before I really get into it. Call it a rant if you wish, because it may be just that. But my personal belief since March was that coronavirus will likely and magically linger on until elections. In fact, through whatever crisis, from the Russian collusion farce to the impeachment trial, which was also a farce, to coronavirus. That virus, if you look at it, is so sophisticated that it's friends with Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and it seems to bypass the mingling of their bodies in close quarters. So who knows what's going to happen next? The Dems are known for election fraud, and so they like nothing better than to have this election via mail-in ballot. And most importantly, they can't afford to have Joe Biden go on a full campaign trail, and God forbid, engage in full-on debates with Trump, not given his cognitive decline. There's still those trying to make excuses for Biden, and no one seems to even care about the man. And from a human point of view, I find that downright abuse, and the agenda appears to be rather sinister. It's rather suspect. I want you to take a look at this short video. To me, it's heartbreaking on a human level. It was on Twitter, courtesy of Tom Elliott. Take a look at this video now.
Nurses at Walter Reed Hospital who would bend down and whisper in my ear. Wow. They'd go home and get me pillows. They would make sure they'd actually, probably nothing ever taught in, you can't do it in the COVID time, but they'd actually breathe in my nostrils to make me move, to get me moving.
Now, that is flabbergasting to watch, and you should. Everybody should be asking the question, is this man fit to rule the country? And what might the agenda be, considering his state of mind? I'll leave you with that point. Now, in my briefing tonight, I'm going to start off with Canada. This is the country that I was raised in. And okay, so the first item up, Canada loses track of 35,000 migrants who were set for deportation. And that's the important part. It's bad enough to lose track of migrants, period. But these people were supposed to be ready for deportation. So I'm going to have to give a bit of background here before I get more into it, okay? Because Canada is in a situation right now where a lot of people are up in arms wondering what's really going on in that country when it comes to immigration. So let's give some background here. Canada has seen a surge in asylum application in recent years, reporting some 50,000 requests in 2017, 55,000 on top of that in 2018, and another 64,000 in 2019. That totals around, well, it totals 169,000. And Canada also took in tens of thousands of Syrian migrants following the migrant crisis of 2015. Plus, the country has also had a major issue with migrants crossing the border illegally from the United States at the notorious Roxham Road in Quebec. Primarily, Haitians at the beginning who've had their asylum status revoked in the US, but that was at the beginning. I'll talk more about that soon. So there was a resettlement of some 46,700 refugees in 2016, which marked a record for Canada since 1978, and that's when the Immigration Act came into effect. Among those 46,700 refugees, the top 5 country of origin were, in 2000, don't forget, we're talking about 2016 at this point, were from Syria, Eritrea, Iraq, Congo, and Afghanistan. By 2017, it then emerged that over 15,000 foreign nationals were on Canada's deportation list. The removal list includes, okay, so these are the people on that list. I'm talking from 2017. Obviously, we know that a lot more are missing now in 2020, but the removal list includes rejected refugee claimants and those deemed inadmissible because of criminal background, potential threat to public health or safety, or risk to national security. And we know full well that various countries have an international reputation for drug cartels and or jihad terrorism. Still, it was not revealed which countries these particular individuals listed for deportation came from back then. That was largely due to identity politics, political correctness, put over the well-being of all Canadians, many of who are visible minority immigrants themselves. An example here, an immigration lawyer, an executive member of the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, called it frankly offensive, he says, to name specific countries because in his mind, it would, quote, stigmatize all members of that population. How ignorant. That's what we need to be working with when it comes to race relations. Saying that everyone from a group is this or that is appalling. But this is where efforts need to be put forth, not in stifling truth. More now about the illegal refugees that flowed in from the US through Roxham Road in Quebec. Between 2017 and 2019, roughly 40,000 more illegals had swarmed into Canada through Roxham Road. Although the largest concentration of illegals were from Haiti to start, by 2019, the largest concentration was reportedly from Nigeria, while Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Yemen were in the top 12 countries of origin. Illegals from around the world were responding to the big welcome from the globalist Prime Minister Trudeau that we have in Canada, who also threw out a welcome mat to returning Islamic State fighters. Canada's intelligence agency, CSIS, also admitted that dozens of known jihadists are walking free in the country and authorities won't charge them. And leaked intelligence documents also showed that there was a much greater threat of Islamic terror than the government was willing to admit. Now comes the news, though, now that the Canadian government has admitted that it lost track of 2/3 of the 50,000 migrants that were targeted for deportation orders recently. Most of them failed asylum seekers, of course. That's why they were targeted for deportation. And the Trudeau government continues to show no interest in national security. In fact, it just emerged that Canada's federal court, presided by federal court judge Anne Marie MacDonald, ruled that an asylum agreement the country has with the United States is invalid because she determined that America violates the human rights of refugees. Yes, that's what she said. This is her twisted reasoning. The Safe Third Country Agreement in place since 2004 requires refugee claimants to request protection in the first safe country they reach. But this Judge MacDonald declared the deal unconstitutional due to the chance that the US will imprison the migrants, something she views as a violation of their human rights. Never mind the fact that many of these asylum seekers are economic migrants in the first place. They just have not been scrutinized, nor have they been vetted. They jumped the queue. Her thinking is off, and that should be obvious. So, according to a BBC report, the ruling marks a major victory for Canadian immigration activists. Well, of course it does. Canada, after all, is ruled by a globalist liberal government who pledged to lead the charge on the UN Migration Pact. And as stated earlier, has a big open door welcome approach that endures during coronavirus. In fact, during anything, people are still trickling through that border. But who's paying for it and how? Don't ask. What about the security risks involved? Don't ask that question either. But there is one piece of good news, a drop in the bucket for starters. A Calgary Muslim who went to Syria to fight for the Islamic State has reported, in fact, he was arrested, but he reported basic knowledge of Sharia. Okay, so that That's all that's required there. Well, it took 7 long years to investigate, for the RCMP to investigate before charges were laid against Hussein Sabi Berhat. Now, I'm pleased that that arrest was made, and I'm hoping that that will lead to more. But this is something we haven't been seeing here, that this guy, a returning fighter, was actually arrested. Now, the brutal activities of jihadists in Syria, particularly those of the Islamic State, from its treatment of sex slaves to beheadings and wanton murder, makes it urgent that these people be brought to justice and penalized severely. But too many are running free around in Canada. Returning ISIL fighters should not be in Western countries supported by taxpayers, period. But if they are, granted, it's particularly difficult to prosecute ISIS fighters, given logistics of investigations overseas, but they certainly need to be at least incarcerated once they're firmly identified until their case is processed. Time served can be retroactive. This is not anything new. The priority needs to be public safety, which unfortunately it's not in Canada. Now, continuing with Canada here, moving over to an issue regarding China. Now, last week I discussed Trudeau rejecting a call to release Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou and unilaterally end her extradition process. He said such a move would embolden China to detain other Canadians to further its political agenda. Last week I mentioned this evolving topic, and I also highlighted some reasons why Trudeau is making an honorable decision here. Yes, he is. And I don't have a lot of faith in the guy's motives, given his record, given he's under review when it comes to an ethics investigation, and this is nothing again new. It just keeps on piling on his gaffes as well as his lack of ethics, but he certainly can't afford to be a big enemy to the US, Trump specifically, especially what happened there with his bid for a UN Security Council seat. We know what happened there, because I reviewed that also the last time I was on. So to recap this issue with Wanzhou, she's under house arrest in Vancouver, subject to an extradition request made by the United States. I also mentioned in the last briefing that her detention set off one of the biggest legal dramas in recent Canadian history, and with ramifications from China. So now the diplomatic problems between Canada and China is over. Trade, theft of tech secrets, and whether Huawei's involvement in building FG next generation mobile networks presents a threat to national security, which naturally it does. So now here's the latest. Get this, lawyers for Meng Wanzhou are now blaming Trump, believe it or not, Trump, for, quote, poisoning, unquote, extradition proceedings against Wanzhou. The weird claim is that Trump poisoned the proceedings so much, in fact, that the judge overseeing the hearing has no choice, they say, but to throw the case out. Nice try. That's about as transparent as you get, and there's no evidence, but who needs any these days? Now, here's the nonsense that the lawyers are basing their accusation on. A reporter asked Trump right after Wanzhou was arrested whether he'd ever intervene in her case. Trump replied that if it became an issue of national security, he would. I mean, that's understandable. So the lawyers go on to say that, and I'm quoting now, quote, the actions of the president and U.S. Attorney General William Barr in the cases of both Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn and his political advisor Roger Stone make clear that his words are just not idle talk, unquote. It's ridiculous. The lawyers even claim that Trudeau contributed to the politicization of the case. They have nothing to go on, and it's obvious what they're trying to do. Given the gravity of this case and where it could go, I'll summarize the case for you made simple. Most people are aware of the case, but I'll give a little bit more information on what it surrounds and why it's so important to keep an eye on. Huawei's chief financial officer is Meng Wanzhou, who has permanent residency in Canada. She was detained in Canada in 2019, and by January 2019, the US Department of Justice announced financial fraud charges against her. She stands accused of lying to HSBC Bank about Huawei's relationship with the Iran-based subsidiary Skycom, thus putting the bank at risk of violating US sanctions against the country. But her lawyer said Canada refused to impose similar sanctions on Iran, therefore she didn't do anything wrong. But it's more than that. The lawyers for Canada's Attorney General say something quite different. They have argued in court documents that Meng's alleged misrepresentations, aka lies, about Huawei's business operation in Iran put HSBC Bank at risk for economic loss. So it is sufficient to make a case of fraud. quite a different approach. HSBC and its US subsidiary also cleared over, and I'm talking the US subsidiary here, and that's influential. They cleared over $100 million worth of transactions related to Skycom through the US between 2010 and 14. And American officials say that this exposed the bank to civil and criminal liability. That should be obvious here. Granted, the bank is a victim here, but it risked huge losses, and Meng is now on the hook for her alleged lies. It seems like a logical view now to talk more about what's going on in China, so I'll do so now in brief. Here's a picture of that place, aside from its already bad rep. China has now ordered Christians to destroy the crosses on their churches and take down images of Jesus as China escalates its crackdown on religion. Authorities have also arrived with cranes, broke into churches, broke their locks, entered the churches, and church members say when they tried to stop the officials, they were beaten up by security guards, resulting some in extremely serious injuries. Another issue going on in China. Chinese dissidents living in other countries are also receiving threatening video phone calls from Chinese police, sometimes with their family members in China visibly held hostage in the background. Now, a lot of Westerners trying to be bleeding hearts don't realize that it is very important to understand that our democracies are made up largely of immigrants who come here as a safe haven. But those who really support freedom of speech, democracy, aren't even given a voice. In fact, they're denied a voice. So one lady was told by a communist enforcer for posting anti-regime tweets, okay, and she's living abroad, let's not forget. Quote, "Let me tell you," she said, this is what she was told, "you need to remember you are a citizen of the People's Republic of China. You were not in the country, but remember, if China wasn't great and strong, you would have no status. You are still governed by the law of China. Do you understand?" So in other words, they are going after the dissidents, and this is a dangerous regime we're talking about. In fact, it's reminiscent of the same kinds of tactics that's used by Iran against dissidents. Moving over to the US now, when it comes to China, US has ordered China to close its consulate in Houston. Secretary of State Pompeo said the decision was made because China was stealing intellectual property, and as we all know, that's an ongoing issue. China's foreign ministry condemned the move on Twitter, and Beijing described the move, of course, as political provocation. Interesting, earlier, unidentified individuals were filmed burning paper in bins in the Houston building's courtyard. Stealing documents, okay? They were burning paper in bins. Hold that thought. Now, moving away from the topic of China now, and still in the United States, the Associated Press. And, you know, we've long talked about how upsetting it is and how dangerous it is that the media has become activist media, no longer reporting you the facts, and there's no longer a separation between the news story and editorial pages. In fact, even not even that long ago, editorials were at least fair. Now the news pages are looking like editorials, and those news pages aren't just editorials. A lot of them are just plain flat out lies and activist material. So we know about the New York Times, we know about a lot of other media, CNN and so forth. That's where the term fake news, of course, came from. But this is the latest stunt pulled by the Associated Press. Very disappointing. That's acting like activist media. It thought it was a good idea to uplift one group, blacks, by minimizing another, white. So it's decided to use a lowercase w when using the word white in the context of race. But it will capitalize B when using the word black in the context of race. Martin Luther King must be rolling in his grave now. I mean, he envisioned unity, all races together. I'm sure he didn't envision a black president in his time. It's truly when one thinks of the progress that was made by blacks in America, in fact, the entire Western world, it really takes a kind of I would call inferior mind and soul that ascribes to this enduring negativity that we're witnessing, the ongoing division, the hate, the unforgiveness, the revenge, as a means to try to bring about equality in a democratic society. And it's grown by leaps and bounds. Human rights for all in harmony, side by side, is what Martin Luther King supported. We also need to remember something very important here. The Black Lives Matter funders and Democrat leaders, they want to stir and create and create anarchy, destroy from within, and usher in a new era that, by the way, will ultimately crush Blacks. Because let's face it, do they really care about Blacks? They never did. The KKK is a Democrat legacy. Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, who created a KKK chapter, was Hillary Clinton's mentor. Biden eulogized Byrd too. That is before his dementia. It's absolutely obscene. The elitists, the elite globalists are merely using Blacks and their historic pain. It's driven by the worst Marxists who are rather insulting to Blacks, see them as easily manipulated. But we're not in the 60s, and everybody should know that. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. It does, and there's certainly opportunity to work at improvements. But it's not just whites versus everyone else. Racism happens in other groups too. I mean, look at the kind of hatred that we see going on even in Iran against the Afghans. They're the ones sitting in the back of the bus, or Blacks being held slaves by Arabs to this day. I want to present some food for thought here. What about the Jewish people and the Holocaust and the ongoing vicious anti-Semitism? I mean, vicious. They're not tearing up the place. They're not being violent. Right after the Holocaust ended between 1945 and 47, they formed a nation. If Blacks want self-respect, Black Lives Matter certainly is not the way to do it. The bigotry of low expectations persists. Now, we've come a long way since the 50s and 60s, and that shouldn't even need to be said. This, you think of people like Morgan. Okay, I'm going to show you a video here that features Morgan Freeman, okay, and some other well-known people. But think of people like Candace Owens, Walter Williams, Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, well-known writers in the conservative camp and speakers. Now, I'd like you to take a look at this YouTube video here on Morgan Freeman and other famous Blacks being interviewed on the issue of racism. If we have that video ready now, let's have a look at it.
Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't or cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
No, I don't. Hey, you and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it? Put your mind to what you want to do and go for that. It's kind of like religion to me. It's a good excuse for not getting there.
Where are we in the United States of America in race relations and what you see from day to day in your life?
Skip, they wouldn't want to ask me that. They wouldn't want my answer to represent it, because God knows I have been nothing but blessed. My whole path, these 33 years have been nothing but a blessing. I have never, and never is a strong word, I've never dealt with racism, and I'm glad I didn't have to.
There is a class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs. There is a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well. That was said by Booker T. Washington.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man.
You know, it's frustrating to me that people take race and they make it personal. You know what I mean? Like we're at a loss in this generation. If you look at it in the 80s, Archie Bunker was a stark racist. Stark. If you don't know who Archie Bunker is, look him up. All in the Family, great show.
You heard him.
The Jeffersons, stark racist. Fred Sanford, stark racist. But you know what black people and white people did? They laughed. You watch 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte. Both of them hated each other because he was black and because he was white. You know what they did? They laughed.
But I asked.
And on that note, we've gone completely backwards as a nation, where we are seeing the beauty that was built in America being torn up by Marxist individuals and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the following. The next item I'd like to discuss, this is really, I think, dear to a lot of people. It's about the St. Louis couple. I talked about that last week, the McCloskeys. Most of you know exactly who I'm talking about. Update. Most of you also probably know that police raided their home. City prosecutor Kim Gardner, who's going after them like a pit bull, said at the time, "Make no mistake, we will not tolerate the use of force against those exercising their First Amendment rights, and will use the first power of Missouri law to hold people accountable." We all know what these peaceful protesters have been about. Peaceful, please. Take a look at this video now. This was done on Fox News with Mark McCloskey. Important things he had to say about what's taking place in America now. He has become representative, unfortunately, of a whole movement that is now, I believe, forming, where people are realizing who is going to take care of us when the people who are supposed to be looking after the well-being of America and rule of law are not doing so. Take a look at this interview by Mark that featured Mark McCloskey.
Mark McCloskey will, though. He now faces 4 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine for the crime of defending himself when no one else would. Mark McCloskey joins us tonight. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. I can't imagine how you feel, like you've woken up in a country you don't recognize. Tell us where you are right now legally, if you would.
Well, it's a totally upside down world, Tucker. The people that broke into my neighborhood, they're all trespassing. The guy that recruited it, that planned this event, said the next day that he intended to break the law, that it was he needed to break laws in order to send his message. None of those people are arrested. None of those people are charged. The prosecutor, the circuit attorney, has apparently decided that her job as a prosecutor isn't to keep us safe from criminals, but to keep the criminals safe from us. It's a bizarro, upside-down world. I've been a little irritated by this process until today. Now I'm just flat out pissed off. I mean, this has gotten to be outrageous.
Well, you should be afraid, too. I mean, the force of the state is coming down on you for exercising the most basic right that exists. It's a natural right, the right of self-defense. Are you going to stay in a place that seeks to put you in prison for defending yourself?
You know, everybody has to stand up and do what's right. And I'm not going to be bullied. I'm not going to be intimidated. The left, the mob, uses social intimidation and threats to get people to knuckle under and apologize for doing what's right. And we're not going to apologize for doing what's right. We're not going to back down, and we're not going to move. People need to stand up, wake up, and recognize this for what it is. It's a concerted effort to destroy our way of life, to change the fundamental basic social contract, to do away with capitalist democracy and replace it with mob rule, encouraging violence, protecting the criminals, and prosecuting people that try to defend themselves against it. It's a bizarro world. It's time for people to wake up and pay attention to it.
Has anyone explained what you were supposed to do in a situation where the police would not respond, they would not come to protect you despite the fact you pay them, and private security wouldn't come either, probably for fear of being sued? What were you supposed to do once people break in and start threatening you?
Well, you know, what various commentators have suggested is we should have just gone inside and filmed them with our cell phones. Well, do you want to have 300 people inside your house breaking stuff, setting fires, and killing you, or would you rather stop them when they're outside? We chose to stop them from coming in.
What's going to happen now? I mean, do you have a fear of going to prison?
You know, I don't know. I have very little familiarity with the criminal process. We've gotten support now from the White House on down, Governor Parsons, the Senator, Eric Schmidt, our Attorney General. It seems like the only person in the United States that thinks we did something wrong is our circuit attorney, but she's the same person that let out of jail everybody that was responsible for the looting and fires and destruction following the George Floyd death in the city of St. Louis. The only people that she wants to prosecute are the people that defended themselves against it, and nobody else, to my knowledge.
So you've been a target of crime. You haven't backed down. You've gone on television repeatedly. People know where you live, and the state has now confiscated your firearms, so you can't protect yourself. On what grounds did they do that? Those were legally registered, as far as I understand.
Yeah, I guess in the technicality of the law is they have to determine whether or not the weapons were readily capable of being, fatal or causing serious bodily harm, and so they have to take them and test them and that sort of thing. And there'll be some revelations that come out about that. But the bottom line is that the police, I've said this before, the police that came out to issue the warrant didn't want to have to do it. They knew that they were just doing their job. They were very polite about it, but nonetheless, you're right. I mean, they present the mob to our door and then strip us of our ability to defend against it.
It's almost unbelievable. I appreciate your coming on tonight, and Godspeed to you and your wife, and we'll be following this, of course. Mark McCloskey, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Heartbreaking, and we certainly wish that couple the best. Unfortunately, North Carolina's Asheville City Council, so things aren't getting any better out there, voted unanimously, and that was 7-0, to pass a measure to formally, get this, apologize to Black residents and issue reparations in the form of investments in certain areas of the community. So a Community Reparations Commission has been created. Going over to the European Union now, jihadis are celebrating as judges rule that Islamic State bride Shamima Begum must be allowed to return to the UK. I think a lot of you know about this particular case. It's out of the Daily Mail this time, UK. It reported up to 150 British jihadis, says this report, and their brides will be celebrating after senior judges rule that Shamima Begum must be allowed to return to fight the Home Office's decision to revoke her British citizenship for joining the Islamic State. So now all of the jihadists and their brides may well be returning next, hence the celebration. Shamima Begum is a high-level threat to Britons and an enemy of the state, but that doesn't even seem to matter. This ruling is yet another example of the normalization of jihad in Sharia. Shamima Begum said she had no regrets as she faithfully served the Islamic State. The dangerous nature of Islamic State brides is often concealed. They're no less brutal and threatening than their male counterparts, despite many social justice warriors trying to make them look like the victims who are controlled by men. These women have been discovered to be viciously beating the Yazidi sex slaves, and the children of these women, known as cubs of the caliphate, were conditioned and groomed to wage jihad against infidel individuals and nations by these very women. So they're not innocent. And unfortunately, Westerners have a tendency to try to, their worldview, they think applies to other cultures and other faiths as well. When it comes to Islamic supremacists and jihadists, you cannot identify with these people. Jihadists are nothing short of monsters on a mission. So next, the UK police are considering dropping the terms, quote, Islamist terror and jihadi because they, quote, don't help community relations, unquote. Alternative suggestions include faith-claimed terrorism, terrorists abusing religious motivations, and adherents of Osama bin Laden's ideology. Absurdity knows no boundaries. You'll recall the Obama administration had a history of purging references to Islamic terror, and Philip Haney, who we well know, he worked at the Department of Homeland Security for 15 years, and he wrote a piece for The Hill in 2016 titled, DHS ordered me to scrub records of Muslims with terror ties. And last year in Canada, the government revised the report that is supposed to update Canadians on the major terrorist threats they face. All references to Sunni and Shia terrorism from the report was removed. In yet another case of activist media, this one from the BBC, it published that falling fertility rates in Britain, and this is all over the West, are a, quote, success story because they mean more women are at work and not having children. I find that really offensive to women and their right to choose. And in fact, if there's anything, is there anything better than raising children? So this is so offensive on so many different fronts. But you see, leftist feminists are not about women's rights at all. It's why they don't care about the inferiority of women under Islam in child brides, forced marriages, honor murder, FGM, I can go on and on. That's just starters. So the BBC thinks that first world countries must respond to what they're calling a jaw-dropping crash in fertility by totally opening up their borders to unlimited mass migration, according to experts that were interviewed by the BBC with an agenda. In keeping with that suicidal immigration policy, the EU Commission is at it again. It declared asylum rejections at borders illegal, not consistent with EU values. I want to take a little moment here to bring you back a year or two when the EU was on the case of the Visegrad Group. Now, the Visegrad Group in Eastern Europe comprises of I got to remember that offhand here now because I did make a note of it. Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. Now, the EU was on their back because these countries were not opening their doors wide to immigration, despite the EU saying that you're not fulfilling your quotas. And Beata Szydło, she was the leader at the time of Poland, and she was being downright bullied by the EU, who was dragging her to court. And Viktor Orban of Hungary stood up for her and said, no, we're standing together. They are not coming in. You are not violating the sovereignty of our countries. Kudos to them. And when the UN Migration Pact came out, you'll remember that more people than anticipated ended up dropping off, did not support it. And a lot of other countries also abstained. People started to realize what was going on here. But since that, the UN Migration Pact, things have kind of gone silent amid coronavirus. But it has come up again and again, and it certainly has not died. And this is why we need to remember that although the elections are coming up, Black Lives Matter is causing problems in America and elsewhere, in fact, globally, the jihad is still never tiring. It goes on, and we need to know what's happening across the globe because everything is converging against democracy. Next item, the World Zionist Organization is working on a plan to bring hundreds of thousands of French Jews back to Israel. Now, this is really significant. It's because of anti-Semitism, mainly Islamic anti-Semitism. Now, when one considers the population of Jews in France, about 453 to 458,000, and the World Zionist Organization is looking at bringing back hundreds of thousands, this is alarming. According to the vice chair of the World Zionist Organization, Hakov Yagol, quote, anti-Semitism is increasing and France is surrendering to jihad, unquote. He continued, the worsening economic situation and the growth of radical Islam are creating a one-time opportunity to break down bureaucratic barriers and bring the Jews of France to Israel, unquote. The World Zionist Organization's plan follows increasing violent anti-Semitism that is largely being ignored in the EU because it's across the board, concentrated more in certain areas, but it's becoming it's increasing and becoming more violent, particularly with countries that swung their doors wide open to immigration. Back in 2018, the president of the Confederation of Jews in France declared, quote, in a few decades, there will be no Jews left in France. We can be hurt by words, we don't mind. But when we are hurt by a knife, a gun, you can't say, I don't mind, unquote. It's no secret how Jews in Israel are presented in Islam, in the Quran, and also in the Hadiths. And many say, well, in the first part of the Quran, the Meccan version, it's friendly. Well, yes, it's friendly there, but then it becomes rather violent when Muhammad made his trek over to Medina because he was rejected by the Jewish tribes, and then war was basically declared and it hasn't ceased since. And for people who are still following the laws of Islam, and they are strict laws of Islam, as we know, unbending laws, the Sharia is not to be questioned. This is the rule in Islam. For those, the law of abrogation also exists. So the laws that were what he declared later on in the Quran now stands. Islamic anti-Semitism, I mentioned that countries that have opened their door wide to immigration, it's worse there. It's violent also in Germany. Even Angela Merkel admitted to it, and she even came out and said that it was due to people, quote, of Arab origin. But it was recently revealed that German authorities issued instructions that incidents of Islamic anti-Semitism must be registered as right-wing ones. Wow. And in Sweden, Jews are reported to be hiding their identity as violent Islamic anti-Semitism increases. A Hungarian European parliamentarian declared more broadly that radical Muslim anti-Semitism, and that's a quote, is on the rise in Europe thanks to massive illegal immigration, unquote. In the UK, Muslim migrants continue to illegally pour in through the English Channel. Last week, the worst day saw another 200. And this is something I mentioned in previous briefings as well, so it goes on. Next, attacks on Christians in Europe rise 285% since 2008. Converts from Islam particularly targeted. This is according to the Vienna-based Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe. Christians in Europe are not simply experiencing social discrimination, prejudice, or restrictions on freedom. Christians, including clergy, have been attacked or killed for their faith in more recent times. So like Jews, violence against Christians is way up. In Islam, we know the penalty for apostasy is death. This is being translated now in Europe. Western countries are increasingly resembling the countries, in fact, from which their masses of migrants have come. Isn't this obvious? Isn't it logical? The same hatred, Islamic supremacism, intolerance, and violent persecution that was seen largely in Africa and in the Middle East has now found its way into Western countries that were once characterized by freedom and rule of law. Moving over now to the Middle East, Black Lives Matter link closer to the Palestinian agenda. A quote from Arab News, a direct quote now. The Black Lives Matter movement has inspired many, and it was inevitable that comparisons be made between the discrimination and brutality against Blacks in the West, and again, this is a quote from the Arab News, this is how they see things, and the treatment of Palestinians by Israeli occupation forces. Palestinians joined the US and European protests and raised Palestinian flags bearing the slogan, Palestinian Lives Matter. A mural by a Floyd was painted on the separation wall near Bethlehem. The Black Lives Matter movement has become an indictment of all forms of racism, injustice, and discrimination around the world. But with Palestine, there is a special kinship, unquote. And the Palestinian Authority is now arresting Palestinians for endorsing Israel's assertion of sovereignty. I've been in Israel 4 times, and there's so many times that I was in a cab with a Palestinian driving, and the Palestinian driver got in a discussion with me and said openly, and I mean several times on each occasion, that they're happy in Israel, that the Palestinian Authority and their own governance abuses them, and they are, again, happy in Israel that hires them, and they feel like they're human beings living in Israel. So there's a lot of propaganda, as we know, there, going out there. But this is coming from Palestinians themselves, and it's going on so much now that there are Palestinians that are actually supporting annexation. But for those who are going and talking openly about it, the Palestinians, they're risking arrest by the Palestinian Authority. The influential International Union of Muslim Scholars supporting Palestinian resistance is a form of jihad for the sake of Allah. The union is backed by Qatar and Turkey and other Islamic organizations affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. The union issued a statement calling on Muslims to wage jihad and self-sacrifice to halt the plan of the Netanyahu government to assert Israeli sovereignty over the parts of Judea and Samaria. Unfortunately, a large number of Muslim Brotherhood organizations exist in the US. We have to remember this, in Canada, in Europe, and worldwide, with links to Hamas and other jihad organizations. We can't lose sight of this. The International Union of Muslim Scholars was founded by the highly influential Muslim Brotherhood scholar and jihadist Sheikh Yosef al-Qaradawi, who has repeatedly, in fact, urged Muslims to wage jihad against Israel. He did not need annexation to the issue to arise for that. He's been constantly talking about it. Some news out of Jordan. Top court dissolves the nation's Muslim Brotherhood branch. Important implications, and prepare for a show down the road. I'm going to tarry on this a bit because it has a lot of implication. First of all, we know that the Muslim Brotherhood is already outlawed in many countries, which includes the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Egypt, Syria, Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan. Although the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan has dominated politics and unions for decades, it's been declining steadily and it's losing ground. It started to lose its grip on power because there were a lot of internal problems and rifts among its members. Over time, it lost its ability to mobilize, and its relations with the state of Jordan just went downhill. So the Jordan MB group intends to appeal the ruling, claiming that the Muslim Brotherhood is, get this, moderate and promotes unity, and nothing, as we know, can be further from the truth. It pretends to be moderate everywhere, the Muslim Brotherhood, but it's power hungry, it's violent, and it's disruptive at its roots. The implications of Jordan dissolving its branch of the Muslim Brotherhood are many. The first involves the alliance between the now dissolved Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood branch and Hamas, which styles itself the Muslim Brotherhood for Palestine. The second implication involves economics and new alliances that are being formed, and we see this going on globally. Jordan is in urgent need of financial aid to deal with its economic crisis, which was worsened by the fallout of COVID-19 like everywhere else, and it affected its tourism severely. And like other countries surrounding Jordan, Middle Eastern countries, partnerships are being formed fast in this era, and Jordan is no exception. For some time now, Jordan wavered about joining the Qatar-Turkey axis, but with this decision now to dissolve the Muslim Brotherhood, it sent a clear message that it's made up its mind who it'll join, and it will not join that axis. Instead, Jordan has been closer to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, has also been deepening its alliance with Israel for reasons of expedience. However, given Israel's plans to assert its sovereignty over its portion of Judea and Samaria, there's trouble in the horizon. The Muslim Brotherhood is firmly set against this, as is Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Saudi Arabia, we keep on hearing reform, reform. If you look deeper, it's not reforming. It's reforming the same way as the Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations that we see that pretend to be reforming, like Tablighi Jamaat. They call it reform, but they're not reforming. They're just changing their style to suit the Western image, let's put it that way. In fact, Jordan, given its large Palestinian population, is one of the most vocal critics of Israel's annexation plan. And Saudi Arabia has declared unequivocal support for its Palestinian brothers. So major drama is going to be coming up. Over to Turkey now. Turkey's iconic Hagia Sophia, how disgusting, now converted to a mosque, a big gesture of Islamic conquest. Now a grand mosque, reopened for worship on Friday for the first time in 86 years. First it was a church, then it went into it started out as a church, then it ended up a mosque, then back a church, and now it's converted again. So ahead of that Friday sermon, the country's religious affairs directorate head, who is Ali Erbas, used an Ottoman sword to climb up the staircase of the pulpit of the historic church. U.S. Catholic bishops joined the Greek Orthodox Church in grief. But the Greek people, 68% of them, that's close to 70 here, they're not satisfied with how the world has been dealing with this, just crying about it. They want to see EU sanctions against Turkey. Turkey, meanwhile, just keeps on getting bolder and bolder. Its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has become increasingly oppressive as he continues to strive to revive the Ottoman Empire. He's made no secret about it. He deems France to be, in fact, Europe. He deems Europe to be, he called it this, a sick man and collapsing. Erdogan's now tightening his grip. He's partly, now his party is pushing a bill to crack down on citizens' right to post freely on social media, as if they ever had complete freedom anyway. But he's cracking down harder. He's forcing companies now to censor or face fines and restrictions. He also wants the identity of users unveiled. So he's pushing legislation to force social media companies to hand over intelligence. Now, Turkey should have been kicked out of NATO a long time ago, as Erdogan cracks down on whatever is left of freedom domestically and intensifies his abuse of human rights. He's long been proven to be absolutely no friend to the West, and certainly not the NATO alliance. Now, some positive news after all that grim stuff going on around the world, and this is really groundbreaking here. 20 MPs from Europe, Latin America, and Africa have signed a pro-annexation letter to recognize Israel's dream of sovereignty over its ancient biblical land. Here are the countries: Slovakia, Wales, Finland, Italy, Romania, the Netherlands, Zambia, Malawi, Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, Madagascar, Kenya, Argentina, Colombia, Suriname, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Guatemala. Kudos to those countries. Now over to Mozambique and the suffering Christians there. Muslims, quote, okay, this is the title, burn churches, kidnap young girls, behead people, displace thousands, and escalating jihad violence. That was one of my articles on Jihad Watch, as many that I'm talking about today, but it's a mix. Bishop Luis Fernando Lisboa of Mozambique's Pemba Diocese has been an outspoken advocate for the need of more than, it's now over 200,000 people that have been displaced by the violent jihadist insurgency. Lisboa states rightly, and it's so troubling that the world has no idea, he says. Yet what is happening? It's happening because of indifference. That couldn't be emphasized enough, indifference. If the world truly cared about Black lives, there would be a loud outcry over what's going on in Mozambique, and not only there, but the genocide, the overall genocide of Black African Christians that's continuing and escalating that's going on. And there would also be international outrage over the ongoing enslavement of Blacks in Muslim countries, in Arab countries, among Arabs, in fact, in North Africa. Instead, Islamic supremacy and jihad activity continue unimpeded because of that indifference that this cleric talks about. Now, ending on a positive note tonight, I think that's the best way to end this. Back over to the US. Reported by the Western Journal and tweeted out by the Trump War Room, civil rights attorney Leo Terrell announces he will vote Republican for the first time ever. Why? Because the Democrats have become too radical. And that ends my section of the briefing. And next, we're going to go into your questions and answers. If Mary or Dick will come back on with me.
I love it. A Democrat voting Republican.
Great news.
Can't beat it, can you? I think I told you just before we started.
Way too bizarre.
We have a Democrat state rep that has announced that he's voting for Trump, and he is promoting Trump in every possible way. Like,
fantastic.
Go Vernon Jones. Go Vernon Jones.
Insanity is insanity, and I think people are starting to wake up. Either they're going to join that insanity and deny that it is absolute insanity, or they'll come to their senses.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more that are probably afraid to say it.
Definitely, yeah. I agree there.
Mary, why don't we go ahead and look at the questions that have come in, if we can.
Okay. We've got, the first question came through quite early, said, do you have any ideas on why the President of the United States has not invoked the Insurrection Act to put an end to the rioting and looting? Could it be because he's afraid the military won't back him?
That's a very good question. And in fact, it's a very good double question. Right now, needless to say, it's close to election and a lot happens. And I'm not good, I can't speak for Trump.
Sure.
All I could do is try to provide somewhat of an analysis to why this could possibly be. During election time, as we know, the knives come out in the best case scenario. This is not the best case scenario. This is the worst case scenario. Trump is also in a position where he has to work, or he is trying to work with the governors. And I don't think it's as simple as, and that's been implied, and he even implied it at one time, although we know that his words are sometimes taken out of context, because if you use, let's say, 5 words out of a sentence or several sentences together, it could sound really bad. And some people say, well, if he's just doing this because he wants the world to see how horrible the left is, how horrible Antifa is, in the meantime, people are losing their lives, that's not legitimate. And I agree, it's not. But there's obviously a reason that is not obvious to everybody, and he has not stated it. But we also do know that the governors have power. He is not about, in my opinion, to rule America as though it is a fascist state. He has, however, he did come out and stop certain types of violence that we saw in various areas when it became too much in certain state buildings. I'm specifically referring to. But the elections are coming up soon. This guy, what he is facing, he is basically the one person standing between fascism, hardcore communism, and Islamic supremacism, the jihad, you name it. The foulest of fascists. This is what this guy is standing against. I cannot believe and it does relate to that question on what he is facing here, because there's a lot we also don't know, and this needs to be understood. I mentioned earlier on when I first started this about how bad things are in the States and the way it looks. If you, and I'm just going to present a logic here. I don't want to come across as sounding conspiracist, but I'm talking logic here. Here's an example of something we don't know, just to back up that question on we don't know what's really going on, the extent of it behind the scenes. You've got a situation where somebody that's obviously not right upstairs is running for the Democrat. There's still goofballs out there saying, well, he has stuttering issues. He has, he just kind of made a gaffe. No, this isn't a gaffe we're seeing here. We're seeing too many of these interviews. This man has a problem. He couldn't even remember the name God. Okay, I mean, this has gone out of control. There are people laughing at the guy, and from a human perspective, this is unacceptable. We protect people with dementia, if that's what it is, because that's certainly what it looks like when you look at them, okay, and you listen to them. So you ask yourself the logical question, why would that person be running for the Democrat? Do the Democrats honestly believe he's capable of running America? It should occur to people, no, he's not. The average person out there who's not suffering with it cannot run America. It takes an exceptional person to run America. Do you really think Joe Biden could do it? So the next question should be, then what do you think the agenda might be? Maybe the agenda is they don't intend for him to run it at all. Maybe the agenda is, from the beginning, to get whoever the running mate is to take over the presidency and do it by bypassing elections. So should he win through election fraud, let's say, and that other person is in a position to just be flipped in, because over time they'll expose them more to the airways, and people will say, well, we don't know what happened here. This guy's crashed. So there goes the running mate. So it may not be that, but it should be a question of what, pray tell, is going on there. Something is very devious. Something is up with that, as they say. To not ask that question, something is wrong with the person. So in short, again, we really do not know the extent of everything going on, but Trump cannot rule the country like a fascist. And if you notice, there have been developments. People are starting to outcry. You're starting to see movement. He did not rush in. He does not charge in. If you look at him over time, he doesn't do that. Even when we go back to the 2016, when he came in, when the debate happened, there was so much disappointment when he first had that debate with Hillary Clinton because he didn't charge in. He could have demolished her in that first debate. And even in the second, he stood back. He let her play all of her cards. And then when she played it all, then he took win. And he went in there with his Trump, unintended, and he clearly won. So he is not a man that likes to charge in. It's not that he's giving way to violence, that he's giving way for America and all Americans. That's what I tend to believe. Have I been disappointed he hasn't charged in? Of course, we're human. We can see what's going on there. But right now, things on one hand are escalating, but on the other hand, good things are also starting to develop as people see and watch what's going on. Because Americans need to also take charge in the sense and get involved that they are Americans and they're also responsible for America. So that's the best I can do under the circumstance, not knowing everything out there. So I hope it gave some little bit of insight on what could be an issue.
That was excellent. That really was excellent for people to stop and think about exactly what you just said. And I come back to his book, Art of the Deal. He knows when to put his foot forward and make that step. Yep.
That's right.
Agreed. Okay, we've got somebody asking about Seattle, Chaz/Chop, as they called it. They thought they heard that 25% of the rioters were Islamists. Any ideas on that?
I can't say that I know about distribution, but one thing I do know is that a large percentage is Antifa. We know that. We also know that Antifa has combined with Islamic supremacists. So the red-green axis is what we're looking at here. And that is the dangerous core of what we're looking at. This combination between Islam and communism, Marxism, Marxist ideology. But there's food for thought here when you think about what both espouse. And I mentioned earlier on that these people don't have the interests of Black. Look at the history of the Democrats. Do you really think they care about Blacks? Come on. This is an agenda. This is a global agenda. We see it building. Not just with the Democrats, it's globalists, it's a global agenda that we see happening. In the end, they're not gonna care about Black people. It'll make it worse for them. What is going on here is something very sinister, and this is something that also needs to be taken into consideration. This red-green axis, they're only friends of mutual convenience, codependence for now. They don't represent anything together. They're going to come to a point. You see, their entire objective is to completely dismantle and destroy democracy globally. After they've done that, they're going to turn on each other. Can you really see China and Russia succumbing to Saudi Arabia and Iran? Come on, absolutely not. They're not going to surrender to them. Neither with the globalist Marxists. They're not going to surrender to Islam. Right now, what they're doing is that they're friends for mutual convenience because they want to take down America, and then they'll end up at each other's throats. But we're here saying, no, they're not going to take over America. We're out there, and people need to fight like crazy because America stands for freedoms, and our hope is that it will continue, along with Israel, along with the Eastern Bloc, and along with the multitudes of people in between that may not be voicing their opinion, but they are indeed asking questions, and they're supporting democracy and freedoms. Because after all, even people coming from these countries realize there's no better place to be.
Yep, agreed. Like the Sunnis and Shias will work together to fight against us, but they will kill each other trying to be at the top of the heap. Okay, we've got a question on the Iranian explosions. Do you know any updates on that?
What goes on in Iran, okay, is very secret, first of all. Iran is desperate. Iran, from what records, the only way we really know information, some of it, is what's coming out of Iran from dissidents. And they have been, anybody, you could rest assured, anybody who rises up against Iran inside Iran is going to be either killed or imprisoned and tortured in prison. This is a rule in Iran. Now, there was a cartoon that emerged. It was quite interesting. And I'm not sure, I can't say I know the meaning of this, but I know an Iranian dissident that said it is really happening. So this weighs into what's going on in Iran, where there was a picture featured in this cartoon of a giant mirror, and the two people holding this mirror is Communist China and Russia. And what's looking in the mirror is a big donkey with the word Iran on the side. And the vision, what the donkey is actually seeing in a mirror is a lion, is a huge, ferocious looking lion or tiger. So how Iran sees itself, this is what the picture is depicting. It's not really what it is. So while it's out there abusing people on the inside, trying to speak tough with the rest of the world, the implications here is that Russia and China have virtually taken over. And when you think about it, Iran right now is being crushed economically. It doesn't have a whole lot. What it's doing is it's talking loud, it's crushing its people, as it usually does. Its mullahs are out there with the grand speech. And this is about it. But they're depending on support from China and Russia, who has declared support, but they're the real bigwigs here. What's going on in Iran is rather disturbing. What Iran has been doing and working on, aside from oppressing its people on the inside, is expanding its proxies globally. And watch out what's happening in Venezuela, because it is expanding hugely in Venezuela, its proxies there. So an answer, as I indicated, I kind of answered roundabout, because none of these answers they sound straightforward, but they usually involve a lot more. Iran continues to crack down on its people. We don't know how many people are being killed. We don't know how many people are being rounded up, but it is certainly working against its dissidents as usual. And from what I hear, dissidents are rising. I also heard another report that a lot of people inside Iran are converting to Christianity. That's another thing. And for those who get discovered, we know it's going to happen to them, but it does not mean that we're going to find out about it. But right now, they're putting lots of efforts to its proxies, and with the money crunch that it's facing, it is seriously stymied in its efforts.
Last question, then. We've got, you brought up Phil Haney, and gosh, there's supposed to be a report out on him, supposedly from the FBI soon, so I'm hoping we finally get at least some results. I'm not so sure we'll get the truth, but sounds like something is coming. But in terms of him, there was a hope that he was going to be advising President Trump fairly soon. Do you think Michael Flynn will be one of those advisors that might be starting to advise President Trump on what's going on, because he had such a great knowledge on that?
You know, I'd like the two of you to talk a little bit more about Phil Haney after this, but both you, Dick, and Mary, both of you know that Trump has a lot of advisors. Yeah. He's got a lot of advisors out there that are advising him on issues regarding Islam, and of course, on the other matters when we're looking at the alliances that are forming globally, the Marxist alliances. So in terms of advice, he's got plenty of good advisors, and that in particular is why he's in a, we like him so much, and we want him to, well, love. Trump has people that absolutely love him. They want him to come back in because he's the one that's fighting against these fascist forces that we're seeing. So he is surrounded by advisors, and the two of you would likely know some, but I would say unequivocally, yes, he is surrounded by good advisors. And yes, there are those that will say, well, he could be surrounded by better in a lot of cases. He still hasn't quite drained the swamp, and I'll leave it there. But I'd like to hear what Dick and you, Mary, one of you, could say more about Phil Haney, because that remains haunting. I mean, this man was a real gift to the world. He knew he was coming up with more, and he didn't get a chance, unfortunately.
I'll just be real brief because I know Dick knows a little bit more, but all I heard was through some resources that I've come in contact with is that we may hear a report from the FBI soon. And I know a lot of people on these webinars ask us almost weekly, have we heard anything yet? And that's all I know. I saw an article out in the Sacramento Bee, I think it's called, the local paper, saying that they will be releasing something this week. So keep a watch at the Sacramento Bee, and we'll see where that goes. But again, I just have a lot of doubts in terms of what they're going to be telling us. I just, Dick and I both, and just about anybody who knew Phil, knows for sure that it was not suicide. There's just no way. So there is some hope that they will actually find some truth in it, but that remains to be seen.
I guess my comment, Mary and Christine, would be, I think it's really important to remember who Philip was and what Philip did. Philip was the epitome of the person who was attacked by the swamp, and the swamp was unbelievably deep, and the difficulties that the president has now continues to be directly related to the people that Obama put into mid and senior level positions in the government. When they hire people, we're not talking about the senior executive service that transitions with a new president. We're talking about people who become full-time government employees, GS-15s. Obama planted them throughout the organization so that at the end of his term, they would continue to do what they're doing now. And I've heard even recently conversations about people in lots of different agencies that are actively fighting against the president's agenda. So Philip Haney was the ultimate whistleblower. I want to make a comment about his advisors, because I do see somebody that we should pay attention to. There's a man named Ken Cuccinelli. Ken Cuccinelli was the Attorney General of Richmond. He is now a deputy in the Department of Homeland Security. He was on Fox News this week, specifically talking about the people that he has put in under his, I believe it's his jurisdiction, into Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. So the people that work, the Philip Haney people, the Customs and Border Patrol, etc., are in there doing their job. If you might remember, 3 of them were lasered into blindness this week, potential blindness, by the crowd. And he's being, DHS and Cuccinelli are being attacked by the leftists out there, saying that, this is absolutely wrong what the federal government is doing. I want you to watch Ken Cuccinelli. The reason is, I think Ken Cuccinelli would have been a good friend with Philip Haney. I don't know to the extent that they knew each other in any great degree, but I am very confident that Philip Haney and this man, Ken Cuccinelli, he did an awful lot of work on immigration before he got into this position. So I'm hoping that somebody like that, who is very blunt, very direct, will be the kind of advisor that Trump will turn to. So maybe Ken Cuccinelli will carry the Philip Haney flag.
Don't the two of you also get the impression here that after Trump wins again, let's hope for that, that we'll start to see more of the draining of the swamp? I mean, you look back when he first came in and what has taken place since. It is awful. I don't think anybody could have imagined how bad the deep state really was. So I can't help but think that if he comes in again, woe be unto these people, because they know what's coming. And that is one of the big reasons why they're willing to do anything. It's like a cornered cat. I'm sorry for cat lovers, because I know a lot of people who are cat lovers, but you know the saying.
Well, I think
about bold, people that are more bold. I think we may see more of this.
I think that is particularly the reason that Trump could put people in prison on the Republican side and the Democratic side at the senior levels and even mid-levels within the swamp is precisely the reason we've had all the activity we've had, and why I personally believe there will be incremental September and October surprises. These people cannot allow Donald Trump to survive because, they're worried about being in prison. And I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats. I think, there is information that whether it's Pizzagate or Epstein or any of the other elitists that have lived whatever kind of lives they've lived, if there's anyone who can actually, if Trump could turn on a bunch of Filipinos, many of the people who are visibly on the air today as politicians or commentators in both parties would actually be in jail, and they would kill people to avoid that. That's actually what's happening, in my opinion. Antifa are the foot soldiers for these people to intimidate us. So before we go, I'd like to just bring up one topic that you talked about, and you talked about, I think it was called social intimidation. This whole notion about the riots in the big cities raises a question about what's going on in the smaller cities and the suburbs. Apparently, Black Lives Matter, sometimes in the character of a pastor or a student, are going to city councils in suburbs and small towns demanding things for Black Lives Matter. In my impression, this is the test for the city council. Either they cave and they blame everything on the white man and they install sensitivity training, or the threat is the violence will come to your suburb. And I think it's very aggressive. If you look at what's happening, we've got this violence, but then we've got this more subtle intimidation going on in other communities. If you do what we say and you commit to sensitivity training, and maybe apparently you said Asheville committed to reparations. Wow. I mean, that's the ongoing aspect of this. So it's a combination of the soft stick and the hard stick.
I agree. Yes.
You had mentioned the McCluskeys, or we showed the video of the McCluskeys, and something I read said that when they took their guns, they realized that her gun was broken. They literally had to fix it for her to even fire it. So what bothers me is that they took their weapons and now they're defenseless. How is that right? That can't be right.
Exactly. You see, when you look at this couple, they represent a whole lot more than what's on the surface.
Yep.
They represent all Americans.
That's right.
Because there have been mini militias that are set up. They're peaceful. They keep talking about these peaceful protesters or anything. Most of them are, well, I don't want to say most because you can't really give a number, but in certain places they've been anything but peaceful. But they're still insisting on calling them peaceful, and they're violent and they're very threatening.
Yeah.
So when you look at the people that are trying to defend themselves and defend areas, this is what they're afraid of. They don't want people like this couple to come out and say, look, I'm going to defend what's mine. They're afraid that if they don't crack down hard on this couple, that others are going to come out. And I mean a lot of others, like America, most American.
Yep.
And I don't think they could stop it. I think they're checkmated there because people are mad looking at this innocent couple who just wanted to defend themselves. They weren't going to do anything. And these people weren't peaceful. They broke through a gate and a sign that said private property. And when you look at their record and what they've been doing in other places and harming people and killing people and maiming people and destroying businesses, they had every right to defend their property. So whatever they do, they prosecute this couple, try to make an example out of this couple. That might be the final straw that breaks the camel's back, and I sure hope it is, if they do that. And if they don't, people are still going to say, we have to start defending ourselves, because you look at that couple and how that couple's being treated, we better all wake up, because it's going to come back to bite everybody.
Yep.
Well, I think the other side of that coin, I think when people see the left leadership allowing and supporting and excusing the violence, I think that is a trigger point for people who might have been inclined to the left or to the Democratic Party. Christine, we talked earlier.
Yes.
Maybe people wake up when they see the embracing the acceptability of violence by the leftist leaders, whether they're mayors, attorney generals, or even the president of the United States. He doesn't seem to be capable of speaking convincingly about where he is on this whole thing. And I think people would be worried about that. I've got just a couple of announcements, Mary, and then maybe we'll ask for a closing comment from you, Mary, and then Christine. Is that okay? So just to our audience, we are continuing to move forward throughout the summer. Next week we have Claire Lopez on Monday night. This week, I think we mentioned earlier, if you happen to be on Thursday and Friday night, you can see two webinars we would recommend. They're not our webinars, and those are by Shahram Hadian. If you go to TLI, Truth and Love, TILproject.com, look under the webinar banner, and you'll see two webinars you may want to pick up this week. So we're continuing throughout the month to bring you these kind of unbelievably different. I got to say, Christine, these are so different than what anybody is hearing anywhere else. It's a cavalcade of very, very important information. It fits together, it's strategic, but the detail that you provide is so interesting, and I think it gets people just to pay attention so much. So I'm going to say thank you to Mary and invite Mary for you to throw the ball to Christine.
I would just say that one of the key focuses for us until November is please get out and vote, knock on doors, and get your family, your community engaged in understanding what's going on in America. And this November 2020 is going to be the most critical election. I know I say it probably every week, but it is the most critical election America probably has ever experienced. So with that, I will hand it off to Christine for some final thoughts, and then we're going to give you something, a little smile to end it with tonight. Christine, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I just want to tell everybody out there, and the way I usually end is on a good note by saying, never give up, never give in. If you read Winston Churchill's comment in Things Great or Small, never, never, never give up. And that is something that if every American that cares about democratic freedoms do, if every American does that, we'll be okay. Okay, we'll be okay. Same for Canada, because I'm from Canada here. And on that note, Mary, I want to thank Mary for sending me this beautiful video. I mean, it really is inspiring because it shows what the land of Canada really is supposed to be. And it's not just for Canada, it's also for the United States. So it's kind of a little friendship video. I want to thank Mary for sending it to me, but we're going to play it for all of you. I want you guys to see it. Mary does, so does Dick. So from Canada to America, here it goes.
All right, excellent. And we will end after this. So good night, everybody, after this. But please hang on and watch.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I'd thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be in Canada, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless you, Canada. From the shores of Nova Scotia to the forests in BC, Montreal to Winnipeg, from sea to shining sea. From Detroit we can see her above the USA, 'cause there's pride in every Canadian heart, and it's time you stand and say